Maren Kessler had been a nurse at Ridgeview Memorial for exactly 4 days when the trouble started. She moved through the corridors with the same quiet efficiency she'd once used clearing rooms in Kandahar. Her red hair braided tight, her expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Nobody at this hospital knew what to look for. To them, she was just the new hire, competent but forgettable, the kind of nurse who did her job and didn't ask for attention. That was exactly how she wanted it. Room 412 belonged to Dominic Calloway, a real estate developer worth more money than most of the doctors on staff would see in 10 lifetimes combined, recovering from a hip replacement that had gone sideways with an infection. Bertrand was demanding but manageable. His son Dominic was the problem. Dominic Calloway walked into that hospital like he owned the floor tiles, because in his mind, money meant ownership of everything it touched, including people. He'd trained in mixed martial arts since he was 14, had a black belt in Krav Maga his father bragged about at country club dinners, and had never once in his 26 years faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. The trouble began over a phone. Dominic had been recording a video call in the hallway outside his father's room, loud enough that it was disturbing 3 other patients trying to rest. When Dr. Sarah Whitfield, the attending physician, politely asked him to lower his voice or step outside, Dominic turned on her with the kind of contempt that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. "Do you know who my father is?" he said, loud enough that the nurse's station could hear every word. "One phone call and you're all unemployed." Maren was 3 doors down, changing in 4 bag, when she heard the escalation. She didn't rush. Rushing was what amateurs did. She finished securing the line, checked the flow rate, and only then walked toward the sound of Dominic's voice rising into something uglier. By the time she reached the hallway, he had stepped into Dr. Whitfield's space, close enough that the doctor had backed against the wall, and 2 other nurses stood frozen, phones half raised, unsure whether filming would help or make things worse. "Step back," Maren said. Not loud, not a question. Dominic turned, and for the first time, his eyes landed on her. He took in the scrubs, the braid, the calm face, and clearly decided she was the least threatening person in the building. He smiled, the kind of smile that had gotten him out of 100 situations with a checkbook. "And who's going to make me? You. I'm asking you to step back and lower your voice. This is a hospital. There are sick people trying to sleep." Something about her steadiness, the total absence of fear in her voice, seemed to grate on him more than any shouting could have. He stepped closer instead of further, close enough that his shadow fell across her, and he laughed. "I'll drop you before you even blink," he said, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear, raising a hand near her shoulder like he might shove her back to prove the point. "I've got a black belt, sweetheart. You want to find out what that means?" The hallway went silent. Dr. Whitfield's hand had gone to her phone, ready to dial security. The 2 nurses had stopped breathing. Somewhere behind them, an elderly patient in a doorway watched with quiet, tired eyes, the way people watch storms they've seen before and know how to survive. Maren didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice to match his. She simply looked at him with an expression that had once made insurgent commanders reconsider their next move, and said very quietly, "You really don't want to do that." Dominic laughed again, but there was a flicker in it now, something uncertain creeping into the bravado, because normal people didn't stand this still when threatened. Normal people flinched. Normal people looked for an exit. Maren looked like she was waiting, patient and unbothered, the way a predator waits when it already knows the outcome. "Is that a threat?" he said, trying to recover his footing. "It's a fact," she said. "Lower your hand, lower your voice, and we can both go back to pretending this didn't happen." For a long moment, nobody in that hallway breathed. Dominic's hand hovered near her shoulder, his pride warring with something instinctive telling him to back away, some ancient part of his brain recognizing a stillness that didn't belong to a hospital nurse. He didn't know it yet, but he was standing in front of someone who had led men through gunfire in 3 countries, who had made calls that decided whether people lived or died, who had walked through hell and come out the other side calm precisely because nothing left in daily life could rattle her anymore. He didn't know it, and in the next few seconds he was about to find out exactly what kind of mistake he'd made. If you're feeling the tension building right now, that's exactly why this channel exists. Stories about quiet people who turn out to carry storms behind their calm. Hit subscribe before we go into chapter 2, because what happens next when Dominic Calloway finally makes his move is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Dominic made his mistake in less than a second. His hand, still hovering near her shoulder, finally closed the distance, meaning to shove her back against the wall the way he'd seen intimidation work 100 times before. He never got the chance to finish the motion. Maren's hand came up and caught his wrist midair, not violently, not even quickly by the standards of what she was capable of, but with a precision that redirected his entire momentum sideways. His shoulder rotated, his balance broke, and before he understood what had happened, he was against the wall himself, his own arm bent at an angle that made every nerve in it scream a warning. His black belt training suddenly useless against a body that moved like it had done this 10,000 times under conditions far worse than a hospital hallway. "I said lower your hand," Maren said, her voice exactly as calm as it had been 30 seconds earlier, as though nothing about the last 3 seconds had required any effort at all. Dominic's face went through disbelief, then panic, then something closer to fear as he registered that the woman holding his arm against the wall hadn't even raised her heart rate. He tried to twist free, the instinct of a man who'd never lost a sparring match in his gym, and found that every attempt only tightened the pressure on his joint, her control absolute, her expression untroubled. "Let go of me," he said, his voice cracking from bravado into something smaller. "When you've calmed down," she said. "Not before." Dr. Whitfield stood frozen against the wall, phone still in her hand, staring at the scene with an expression caught between relief and disbelief. The two nurses had stopped pretending to film and were simply watching, mouths slightly open, because nothing in 4 years of nursing school had prepared them for what they were witnessing. Down the hallway, hospital security finally arrived, 2 guards jogging toward the commotion, only to stop short when they took in the scene. Dominic Calloway, black belt, gym rat, son of one of the wealthiest men in the state, pinned against a hospital wall by a nurse who looked like she was waiting for her coffee break. "Ma'am, we've got it from here," one of the guards said carefully, unsure how to address a situation that defied every training scenario he'd ever run. "He's calm now," Maren said, releasing Dominic's wrist with the same unhurried precision she'd used to catch it. Dominic staggered back, cradling his arm, his face flushed with a humiliation that money had never taught him how to survive. He looked at her, really looked, searching for some explanation, some category he could file her into that made sense of what had just happened. "Who are you?" he finally said, quieter now, all the swagger drained out of his voice. "Someone doing her job," Maren said, "which right now means asking you to leave this floor before I have to explain to your father why his hospital visit ended with hospital security instead of a warm bed." It was Bertrand Calloway himself who ended up hearing the full story 20 minutes later, propped up in his hospital bed, listening as Dr. Whitfield recounted what had happened in careful, measured words, still visibly shaken by what she'd witnessed. Bertrand, for all his money and all his son's arrogance, had not gotten wealthy by being foolish, and he recognized immediately that something unusual had just happened in his hospital corridor. When Maren came in later to check his vitals, professional and unbothered as though the entire incident had already left her mind, he studied her with new eyes. "My son said you moved like military," he said carefully. "Special forces, maybe?" "I moved like someone who didn't want your son to hurt himself or anyone else," Maren said, checking his chart. "That's not an answer." She looked up, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her calm, controlled eyes, something that had seen things Bertrand Calloway's money could never touch, could never buy, could never protect his son from learning the hard way. "I led a Navy SEAL platoon for 6 years, she said simply. "Your son is lucky I've spent the last 2 learning how to walk away from confrontations instead of finishing them." Bertrand said nothing for a long moment, processing the fact that his son had put his hands on a woman who had commanded elite warriors through combat most people couldn't imagine, and had walked away with nothing worse than a bruised ego and a badly needed lesson in humility. When Dominic came to visit his father later that evening, subdued and uncharacteristically quiet, Bertrand simply looked at him and said, You have no idea how close you came to learning a very expensive lesson today. Apologize to that nurse, and mean it." Dominic found Maren at the nurse's station an hour later, his apology halting and genuine in a way nothing about him had been that morning. She accepted it with the same steady grace she brought to everything else, already moving on to her next patient. Because for her, this had simply been another Tuesday, another moment where quiet competence outperformed loud arrogance, another reminder that the most dangerous people in any room are rarely the ones announcing it.